So first I'm doing a sound check because we got some feedback that, well, we're still learning how to use these new microphones, frankly. So when I turn, then you lose me, right? So let's see. Willa in the back, can you hear me? Okay, great. That's a sound check right there. Couple of things came up during the break. First one is there's a KCC board meeting today. And what time is it, 1:30? 1 o'clock?
Actually 2 o'clock.
Okay, it's moved to 2 o'clock. We're announcing it because any member is invited to come, and it will not be here today. So if you want to go to the board meeting, see Peter Frothingham there or Linda there, and they'll tell you where to go, okay? Secondly, this is Erik Fromme's last day with us. So I just thought we'd all say together, thank you, Erik. Let's say it together. Thank you, Erik. And we, of course, all wish him all the kind of happiness and peace that he brings to us, and that he has a wonderful life in Boston. So, and come see us a lot. Even maybe on streaming, and maybe we'll stream Erik to help us give talks still. Okay, this is your turn. So what's up with you and Dharma and Karma and Dharma and all that? Yeah, Alan. Oh, wait for the mic. There are no longer any simple questions.
Simple question. I noticed there are no pictures on the altar. Is that by intention?
No, nothing we've done so far is intention. It's serious. I mean, we're just getting it back together, and it's not clear who's in charge of moving things around and who's doing that. And so last, whatever it was, Friday, I just grabbed some people and said, move that altar from behind there. Makiko and Alesh helped. And we just decided ourselves. So, and we're not really clear where everything is yet. So there needs to be kind of a patience and a helping. It's a great question, but there's nothing about that like this is it, or there's some, Buddhist reason for it looking like this. We're just figuring it out. Okay.
Also, if you come here during the week, there's still painting and construction and all kinds. It's basically, except for right here, still a construction zone. So it's not time to put things in their final arrangement yet. And that's true of almost everything. Like people have been asking where, if you want to send something out to SCOL, should you put it? And for now, the blue SCOL box is behind the door in the interview room over there. So that's where to put it, but that's not where it's going to stay once the basement is finished.
Yeah.
So almost nothing is in its truly settled position yet.
Yeah.
You have to be really ready for a lot of change still.
Yeah. We're sort of halfway there in terms of the building. So several months still probably of construction downstairs and getting a community space and a kitchen and kids' rooms and other things. Corey.
So during the meditation today, when I noticed I was distracted, and I looked at it and said, hey, am I willing to give up that distraction for this meditation? The little voice in my head said, I'm not so sure about that. Yeah. So I was just wondering, then I'm like, I said, well, I kind of made me think back, why am I practicing meditation? What's, Buddhist path? But I didn't know, what, where do you go if you find that you have a distraction that you just feel like holding on to?
Well, first of all, I love that you tried out the suggestion. That's good practice to try things. I find that First of all, when someone offers something that way, we have an initial resistance just off the bat. I already know what I'm doing. I don't need to try anything new. And that's important to look at. Could be some PRIDE, pride, in I already know. So it's good to just try stuff out, and then if in 5 minutes it doesn't work. So I'm happy that that was somewhat useful. So you're asking, after you see, okay, I'm distracted, am I willing to let go of it? Meh. Maybe, maybe not, or even a strong no. Like, I need to think about this. That one comes up for me. I haven't had time to think about this, so this is a time I can do that. So the first thing is just see it. Just see it. It's like anything else that comes up in our life or on our cushion. Just see it. Oh, yeah, hi. You might want to label it if you want, but maybe not. But you could say, resistance. High resistance. Sometimes when I just see it and I can gently describe it, it's already fading. So that's something to see too. But sometimes it solidifies more. And then you've got to make a decision. You have to make a decision. Nobody's in there with you but you. So sometimes I say, I'm going to think about this, Okay, do it. See where that goes. Usually it just leads me off into what I do off the cushion, just ruminating and planning and being confused. So I'll try that for a while with it, and then I go again, am I willing to let go of this? And often I'm more willing the second time, because it's like, okay, I see. There's a certain way that I like to move toward treating my shamatha, my calm abiding time, as more sacred. And that's a hard word for some people, but it works for me. Like, it's a sacred time. And I want to hold it that way and treat it that way. Like we do this space. We don't come in here and just do anything. So I like to treat that space like that. And that helps me then say, I can do that later. I remember Ringo Toko Rinpoche said, say to yourself, I'll get back to you. The thing that's plaguing you. Okay, I'll get back to you later when I'm off the cushion. Okay? Good question. Yeah, Sarah. And then Lynn. Okay, so.
And if you're thinking about being a streamer, this is now part of a backup streamer job to trot this thing around. So.
Yeah.
Maybe we should get a microphone for both sides of the room. That way. Okay.
Oh, we're looking at that. Okay.
Oh,
we had to disable one of the microphones to not hear the AM radio.
Poor microphone. So I guess, I don't know, it's just had something interesting coming up this week. I had a very interesting situation come up at work where normally it would cause a lot of anxiety. And a month ago or something like that, I had a major thing come up where I really broke through anxiety, and I was actually using Tonglen practice to do it.
Yeah.
It cuts through it very well. And ever since then, when I've had anxiety come up, it's been very easy to handle. I mean, even stuff where it should cause severe anxiety and used to. Sometimes I find I can cut through it in minutes. And that's been very helpful, but what's been interesting is that, so it's been interesting looking at that, interesting looking at a situation where like something would be like used to be very severe situation, and it's kind of like, oh, okay, well, I can just kind of handle this without anxiety. But what was interesting is the other night I had, I've been kind of going through the 5 stages of grief regarding the situation. And the other night I had anger coming up regarding a certain person. And I just kind of realized that I mean, especially as just having sat through all the anxiety and all these things in the past and kind of broken through that, I've kind of really realized in my sitting that pretty much all of my negative emotions are just a reflection of not seeing things as they are. That's actually something interesting that I asked Khenpo Rinpoche when he was here. I asked him about the nature of fear, and he just said these things are things that come up when we're not seeing things clearly. Mm-hmm. And so I just looked at anger like that. I was like, I realized it doesn't matter how rational, in quotes, the anger is, or how it wants to rationalize itself, or how the worldly world says, oh, you should feel angry in this situation. I was like, I just been sitting there, I'm like, well, would a Buddha feel angry in this situation? Or would I, when I'm sitting in my most deeply, would I just be calm and peaceful and even approach it with love or compassion and go, well, what's really going on with this person? What can I do to help? And so the first thing I tried doing was, I've been recently, when I've had anger come up, I've just tried focusing on any object of love I can think of. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's very difficult. And I was telling Erik, I've been using my cat. I love my cat. And it works for joy. Our cat works for joy. I can think of joy, and he makes me happy. And I can also think of love, and I mean, it's a wonderful thing. Or people I care about and love. And it's like that cuts through it. It was really interesting because it gave me this second perspective. It's like as soon as I did that, it's like there's the anger coming up. I see it passing, and then I was like, okay, well, if I focus on more love, and then I started thinking what I've been doing with the Tonglen, I've actually kind of modified it a bit, where in situations where I could focus on the person and go, well, let me take in your suffering and offer love out. Yeah. And that really seemed to cut through it. And it was like, it's really great because it was like, even though the anger was still coming up and I was still having to process it, it was like, it was like I was able to say, oh, well, wait a minute, what is this going on with this person's life? When I'm in my most centered, I can see love for this person. I care about them. They're suffering, and I can see that. Mm-hmm. And it was really helpful. And so it's been a very interesting thing.
I'm sitting here, Sarah, and I'm doing two things about listening to you. One is totally getting that you're sharing some very useful practice, and I think it is useful. I keep waiting for a question. I'm not sure there is one.
I'm not sure there is one either.
Okay.
Because I think we were just saying what was coming up.
Let's maybe keep it a little shorter so other folks can get on the floor, okay?
Sure.
Okay, so I don't want to cut you off, but was there more?
I think that's about it. It was just sort of an interesting observation of something that came up in sitting.
I just found myself kind of waiting for a question and then realized maybe there isn't one.
Yeah, I was wondering about too, and I'm not really sure I have one because in a sense I know what I'm supposed to do, but it was kind of an interesting thing that
I think it's a wonderful sharing, and it is true. The core of what it seems you're saying is that Tonglen, and I think, who doesn't know Tonglen, just raise your hand and everybody. Okay. So the taking and sending practice, take in the suffering of others, send out all kinds of joy. It cuts anxiety really quickly. I think that the thing most people experience is forgetting to do it. That's where our challenge is. We learn the practices and we forget to do them, and that's because of our habitual mind that just drives us in an opposite way. And so the forgetting gets challenged by mindfulness, by awareness. What am I doing in this moment? Oh, I'm lost in anger. I'm lost in whatever. Oh, well then I'll breathe in the suffering of all those lost in that kind of emotion. And it cuts it because once again, we're sprung out of our self-centered bubble. So let's get to Lynn then. Thank you, Sarah. Nice sharing.
Erik, I'm really going to miss you, and I want to tell my questions that are the things that are going on in my life right now are health-related issues with my nephew, who is the 31-year-old that has esophageal cancer, that the chemo is not working anymore. It's looking grim. And then a friend who is just diagnosed with brain cancer. And so more my age, and my nephew. So that's kind of new news on that end. And my nephew is, who is using words like I'm thinking. He's keeping a blog. He's at the importance of thinking positively. I'm going to fight this. Yes, there's only 4% that live through this, but I'm going to be one of that 4%. So it's the kind of the fighting, thinking positively, the wanting things to be different, and and I want things to be different too. So it's back to that question of how to support and where there is room for the thinking positively and the fighting cancer mixed in with this reality.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the first thing is just to acknowledge what a difficult situation that is. And to some degree, every situation is different, and there's not a lot that you can say that's applies in every situation, but the first thing I'll say is I think the way that you're thinking about it is just right. You want to support your nephew and support your friend or family member, your friend with brain cancer, and you're trying to think, well, how can I best do that? And I think the advice I've heard in this situation that seems to be the most generally useful comes from an anthropologist who went around to elder tribesmen in different North and Central American Aboriginal tribes, Native American tribesmen. And she asked them, what is it, how do you help people who come to you for help? That was basically what she was asking. And she consolidated what she heard into what she called the fourfold way. And the fourfold way is show up, pay attention, especially to what has meaning or heart. Tell the truth without judgment or blame. And then try not to be attached to the outcome. In terms of optimism or the desire to fight and the desire to think positively, I think the fear that we have is, or the struggle that we have is, not everybody is in that place. And it can be hard for someone who's more trying to relate to the impending loss and the grief to connect with someone who's really focused on, I'm going to beat this and I need to stay positive. My approach has always been to try to meet people where they are and to try to encourage them, whatever it is that they're trying to do. I haven't found trying to discourage people to be an effective strategy, even though sometimes I wish that they would prepare a little bit for what if things don't go their way. Or alternately, just as, I wish that we could relate around the way that I'm seeing things, so we could feel a little closer. But it's a really good opportunity to practice, putting somebody else's needs ahead of your own. And I think the thing about, tell the truth without judgment or blame. Well, one thing is that there are some truths that are very difficult to tell without, or maybe impossible to tell without judgment or blame. And so maybe keep those to yourself. The other side of it is that you have to, it's not helpful to just go around spitting out truth without regard for the person's openness and ability to hear it. So I think that's the other piece. The final point that I think relates to practice is that in the first paramita, generosity, so you can give people, there's 3 kinds of generosity, maybe there's more than that. Anyway, you can give people conventional things like money or food or support or help. Another way of being generous is to share the Dharma, and that can be tricky. But the third way is to share what Roshi Joan Halifax calls the gift of no fear. So if you can meet them where they're at, and it doesn't mean you don't have to be afraid, but if you can meet them where they're at and not add more fear to the situation, then that always seems like a gift. And all the practice that you do here with calm abiding is a tremendous support for that.
I think those are really pith instructions for when you find you're parachuted into the middle of that situation. One of the things that comes to my mind is what we can do outside of that situation in terms of just the general context of our own life and our general way of communicating about death in life in general. Because when we get down to a certain point where somebody is making a choice between the notion that winning is surviving this particular disease or this particular situation for a certain amount of time, and losing, which is not surviving for that particular amount of time, it in a certain way begs the question of how do we relate to death in general? And how can we relate to death in a more open way? And that's something that if we don't look into our own lives and into our own relationship with death, then there's a certain kind of internal resource that we could develop there. There's something to go deeper in our own hearts and minds in that relationship. And that's something that I think has been true and very helpful for society in general, is for those people who have been willing to speak more openly about death and the dying process, and bring that more into the general conversation of the culture. This, I think, can provide a different context, where the kind of tension that you're experiencing may, in some cases, lessen some. But that, just a kind of gentleness about that, and oftentimes I notice I get very focused on fixing this one thing right now, when the ingredients to fix it right now aren't there. And to be able to step back and to think, well, I'll do what I can. And then to be more patient and kind about that, and to bring some kind of, and that's part of meeting the situation as it is. And that part of that is meeting ourselves as we are. So, thank you for your thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn.
So I'm in a study group using Ken McLeod's Wake Up to Your Life. And so we're doing meditations on death and impermanence. And and looking at habitual patterns is very uncomfortable often. And he recommends having a teacher to witness that you could get into trouble in certain places. And I've never really established that kind of relationship. So I just wondered how important you all thought that was for avoiding going overboard one way or another.
Well, on one hand, it's crucial. And on the other hand, we're in circumstances unlike some of the early practitioners, where they were up close to the teachers. I'll take one of my root teachers, Venerable Tipton Chudran, as an example. In the early days, you could have direct access really easily. Now she's got tens of thousands of students around the world through the internet and through traveling 6 months of the year to Asia and Europe. And so it's very different, you know. Some of these instructions come from people who lived in monasteries and lived with their teachers, you know, in Tibet and in India. So it's very important to have a relationship with a teacher, but you can't conjure it. The instruction I've heard when the question comes, how do I find a teacher? How do I make that relationship? Is practice. Keep practicing. Do your practice and keep practicing. And in the Kagyu lineage, the practice of appreciating teachers in general, teachings in general, deepening your understanding of, you wouldn't even have the Dharma if teachers had not come. I mean, we didn't know the Dharma, right? So if Kalu Rinpoche had never left his home country, flew to countries where he didn't know the language, didn't know the culture, took that huge risk, and came here, we wouldn't have this center. Speak of interdependence, oh my gosh, you know. And other teachers, Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa in the Gelug lineage, they purposely decided to teach the crazy 1970s hippies from the West who came over to India. And they were told, those people are nuts, don't teach them, don't waste your time, you know. They're taking drugs and da-da-da. And they saw something. And also there's a bodhisattva vow to bring the Dharma to areas that have not had it. So they were doing that. If they all hadn't done those things, we wouldn't be sitting here. So we do have connection to teachers. But on a practical level, so on a practical level, to see that, to honor that, to do the prayers in the Kagyu lineage that say, I honor my gurus, we're not talking about us up here, well, I can't speak for these folks, but I'm a conduit when I'm at my best. I'm a conduit for what I learned. Kind of putting my hand here, my teacher here on my shoulder. I try to only share what I learned. If I share more than that, I usually go off on something I regret. So it's very important to have the teacher, but we're not in conditions to all have one-on-one, like Ken's maybe talking about in his book. One thing you can do here very practically is we are open for one-on-one interviews, and some people do take that to heart, and they check in every couple months about their specific practice, or people who are new. Some of you who are in here who are new have emailed and said, I just want to come see, meet with you and see what this is all about. So please do take advantage of that. I think it's online, how to get a hold of each of us. You email to each of us individually at our own email, and we'll set it up. Erik, unfortunately, is going, so I don't know, maybe if you're available for interviews through the phone. You don't know either, because you haven't landed.
Hadn't thought that far ahead.
Yeah, well, Zopa's thinking now. So, but there's possibles for that, and Lama Michael, for especially long-term people who do relate to him as your teacher, he's been less available because of the 3-year retreat. He's gone out there half of many months, so he just is not so available for retreats, and he regrets that, but he can't do everything. 3-year retreat ends in about a year and a little bit, so a corner will get turned there, and we hope he's still vital and able to then do some of those. And I just mean it's been really exhausting for him, as many of you have noticed. And we're all paying attention to that, so is he. So I want to let you know that. So that's as far as I can get with it. But they say whatever practices you have learned, and you have learned many things from very eloquent teachers, because you've been here and eloquent teachers have come. Practice them, and practice your, they call it guru devotion, but it's a hard phrase for Westerners. Sometimes it just turns us off. But I say, you can just say practice appreciation for the teachers and teaching, deepen that appreciation, and karma functions, and things do unfold from that. Does that help?
Yes.
Yeah. Bill or Erik or Dora?
I'm reminded of something that Bokar Rinpoche said on the topic of teachers. And particularly in Vajrayana tradition, the issue of relating to a teacher can be often spoken of in kind of these very dramatic terms. And I think that can actually get in the way. And the thing that Bokar Rinpoche said, he said, you may have heard teachings or read teachings that you should regard your teacher as the Buddha. You want to take that on? I don't want to take that on. And I hope nobody here would expect me to. I think you all have better sense than that. But that said, he said, so you've heard this teaching, that you should regard your teacher as a Buddha. He said, I want you to look and see how it is that you regard your teacher, just very directly. Just what do you see? He said, you might see your teacher as the Buddha. You might see your teacher as a great bodhisattva. You might see your teacher as merely someone who's learned in the Dharma, or somebody who's a good example of trying to practice. You might see your teacher really just as somebody who has a colleague on the path who has a little bit more experience or insight than you. So start from there. Yeah. And that I think is very important. And then you can take advantage of people where you might find, well, in this, I'm not so sure. I don't like that person's sense of humor, but they seem to know a little bit about X. Ask about X. Find out. So it becomes simpler. It's a simpler thing. It can be, and I think then it can evolve in its own kind of natural way, very gradually.
I think it's worth mentioning that you can have a teacher in different categories. So you could have someone who, like Kempe, who you could consider your important root teacher, but maybe you're only able to see him once every few years, or at most maybe once a year. Still, you can use that person in your practice if you do a kind of guru devotion practice, and that can still be an important relationship. But in the meantime, you can also have access to your local spiritual friends, to have someone to check in with a little more frequently. And so that can just be, or like Bill says, going to for certain purposes or whatever. So I think you can have you can check more than one option.
I just wanted to comment that I also heard that it's advised that we live at least 3 valleys away from our teacher.
Yeah, that's a common thing, and if you get up too close, you'll see why. It's kind of the other metaphor besides valleys is fire, and you want to be close enough to the fire that you're nice and warm, toasty in your practice, a little challenged, maybe sweating a little, but you don't want to get fried. And so it's an interesting thing to ponder. Yeah. Having spent 5 years at Sravasti Abbey living physically with my teacher, I would say it was delightful to be fried and to be warmed, and then at times to just go, we used to call it running down the hill with your hair on fire. And so sometimes that would happen, but you'd come back, So, it's just an interesting thing to think about. And who would know that? Only you. You're the one that knows. That's what the interesting thing about Dharma practice is. In a certain way, our Buddha nature inside is leading ourselves. And there's a certain way I'm working lately on trusting that, trusting it more, because your teacher can tell you a lot of things, spiritual friends can tell you a lot of things, but you already somehow know in yourself, that's for me, that's not for me. Or you can even look and say, am I dismissing this too quick? Am I grabbing it too quick? We all do all of those things. But ultimately, the path, in a very interesting way, despite interdependence, there is a personal thing that has to happen, the personal effort, the personal checking, how am I doing here? And then checking in with Dharma friends, checking in with spiritual friends, having an interview, I do interviews with Lama Michael every so often because I'm scared to sit up here without doing that, And it's quite helpful. And I'm going to go see my teacher at Sravasti at the end of August. And I do that once a year because it's close enough. And there's always a brightness that comes from those interactions. Yeah.
The power of having the mic.
Yeah.
I just want to say, the teaching from members of the Sangha that you wouldn't necessarily think of as actually talking to a teacher. I know people who've been doing this decades more than I have, and several are in the room right now, and some are elsewhere today, but I just watch how you live. I watch how you are with people, how kind you are. I watch how you might relate in an emergency. I see how it feels to be around you, and I might never ask an actual question of you, but it's really important for my own use of the Dharma teachings.
Yeah. The generosity and joyous effort of this Sangha just always inspires me. I mean, it's just people are just used to pitching in and doing things together and making it happen. I mean, every single person has done so much. And we talk about this new building, but my gosh, some of you 20, 30 years building Pecha tables, I mean, just things we use, sewing cushions, donating time, money, your joy. It's inspiring. Yeah. So let that be inspiring to you that the person sitting next to you has, made this happen. And you're right, Linda, that's a big teaching. Big teaching right there. Up here, Alan.
On the theme of a couple of the earlier questions about regarding, people who have terminal illnesses and so forth, a slight twist on that. I earlier this week sent out a prayer request about my brother-in-law who has terminal liver cancer, and I'm looking for some advice with respect to my role in interacting with the family. So it's my wife's brother. My wife is on 3-year retreat. And I'm already getting pressure from folks about, is Susan coming out of retreat? Is she going to come and see him? Even her own son saying to me, but it's her brother.
Yeah.
And I'm just seeking any advice that I can get about how to deal with that without having to debate, without having to be confrontational.
Yeah.
Giving the assurance that, of course, she loves him. What she's doing is about her love.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, she and the lamas will decide, because thank goodness there's a protocol for those things when you're in long retreat. So she'll meet with probably Lama Michael, Lama Tara, and all I can do is share my story that when I went in retreat, my son and daughter-in-law were not pregnant, but trying to get pregnant. Somewhere about 3 months into retreat, I got a picture of the fetus, the little, sonar picture of, hey, we're having a baby. Then I calculated it out. This is all going to happen in this year while I'm in this cabin. Oh, there were many tears, And it was amazing to stay there and not even request to go. I thought it all through, like, would I go and do what? Go and look at her pregnant belly, or go and, and I was allowed more communication, some phone calls and emails. But then when the baby got born and we had our wonderful phone call, it was like 4 days later, the baby was in the NICU, the neonatal intensive care. And at that point, what I knew was the most important place I could be was right where I was. And my practice, which was fairly good, it went up several notches. And it just got clear what you're saying. But you're asking a different question too, which is, what do you say to all those people who say, really, you didn't go out and be with them in that crisis? And, you know, isn't that kind of inhuman? And all I can say is, you know, you have to wend your way through it step by step. Some people will be more open to hearing that this is the love, this is the best thing she can do, is stay there, do prayers. We don't know what Susan will decide. I mean, I don't, maybe you do. And people who will feel angry about that, you have to sit with their anger. It's kind of what Erik said. Everybody's going to have their different thing. You know, you're terrible about this, you're spot on about this. Those are all, you just have to be with them in those things and expect all of those things to rise. You know, anger, discouragement, you being criticized, you being praised, she being criticized or praised. So that's all I can share. Do you have more, Erik, about that, or Bill or Dora? It's a tough one. It's a really tough thing, because I also want to say that my decision to stay there and not even ask to go affected my relationship with my son, and I think there's still some effect from that, like on his part, some distancing. But I still, because I hold the Buddhist worldview that it's not just this life, and as my teacher, Venerable Chitran, told me, this is your son for this life. But if you take the Buddhist worldview, you've been many other things to each other. So you have to decide, based on that, what is the most important thing to do. You know, and it's tough, tough, tough work. Yeah, so I don't know. Did you have more, or you want to hear from Bill?
I'm not asking advice for Susan.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is advice for you.
That's going to be her decision with the lamas, and I am accepting of whatever that is. And I'm encouraging her to follow her heart, complete retreat, whatever. I'm supportive of that.
Yeah, your advice is how to deal with the family, because you're on the outside. But I'm also thinking holding that big view as you figure out what to do may be useful to you and them. Yeah.
This is one of the big challenges for extended retreat in the West.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
It's one of the biggest ones. And it's something that's, in a certain way, it's particular to our modern, well-connected culture, where we assume that actually within 16 hours, you can be pretty much anywhere on the globe if it's really important and you have the money for a plane ticket. So that creates a kind of pressure and expectation. And the instantaneousness of communication also creates a pressure and an expectation. And it's very hard to not operate on that time frame. Those of you who may not have a cell phone know how hard it is to just live your life and have people. It's kind of a microcosm of this in a certain way. To not, or you have a cell phone and you've resisted moving up to a smartphone.
Zopa still has a flip phone.
Okay.
To control
all
the
these
noise.
things, just to live in a way that's not in sync, has its own pressures, and this situation just multiplies it dozens and dozens of times. There's both the difference in view about this, the immediacy of that you should respond quickly, and you, if you could, you just should. There's also the difference in the cultural view. There's a difference in the spiritual outlook. So these are all. This is just part of the circumstance, and it's something that we have to consider in how it is that we arrange the protocols on retreat. And in a similar way, it reminds me a little bit of what I was saying in response to Lynn, that it's not so much right in the moment is sometimes not the opportunity. You don't have the opportunity to respond in a way that's truly satisfying in the moment if the groundwork has not been laid. Mm-hmm. If the conversations have not occurred, if we haven't talked to our mother and father, if we haven't talked to our siblings about what our intentions are going into retreat, and been very straightforward about it, these things will be more disruptive for everybody involved. And in this case, you're winding up being the advocate for in a situation where you're kind of stuck in the middle. But I think Erik's advice, the 4 pith instructions, are really kind of where it is. There isn't a way to necessarily fix this in a way that it will look like you would like it to look like. It just may not happen that way. Yeah. But you can do your best. And with each individual in the situation, you have to meet them as they are, and you have to bring yourself as you are, and really mainly relate to that piece of it. Because there are other people's decisions that you can't say, well, I think this is the way it should be or not. It's just the way other people have decided to do things.
By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state. Thank you, and in order to all of us helping with some beauty and order, if you can check your cushion and the cushions in front and back, kind of straighten them out, make sure the pillows are nicely set, take all your stuff with you, put your cups back there. That will